Arcata. My name is Chris Dart, president of Danco Communities. Our team at Danco created this video to provide our community with a clear understanding of the facts and realities surrounding the proposed Rogers Garage affordable housing project on Old Arcata Road. In this presentation, you will hear from our team, third-party consultants, and members of the Arcata city staff. Together, we'll share data and research that speaks directly to the environmental and community questions that have been raised. As a company proudly rooted in Humboldt County, we are committed to collaborating with the community to create thoughtful, sustainable housing that reflects our shared vision for a vibrant and inclusive future. On behalf of all of our team at Danco, thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. From 1946 to 2000, it was an auto repair, auto demolition, and auto paint business called Rogers Garage.
My name is David Loy. I'm the Director of Community Development with the City of Arcata. The proposed Rogers Garage project is a three-story project that is effectively principally permitted for the area. Principally permitted means that they don't require special planning permits or zoning clearances to be able to build it. It's allowed for by right in the zoning that we have.
This site is it's an opportunity because it's an infill site, and it currently has contamination at levels that are prohibit residential use. So this project cleans up the site into residential standards and takes an infill site and reuses it and converts it to residential. The location is fantastic in that in affordable housing in general, the state gives credits and incentivizes and emphasizes development to happen within close proximity to schools, to parks, to grocery stores, to transportation, which this site meets all that criteria, especially the school. In terms of, when we're looking at different development sites on what, and rating and ranking them on what's best for development, this meets all of that. The highest resource areas criteria is top performing schools, lowest poverty rates, the highest household incomes, the lowest crime rates, the high levels of job access and economic mobility, the lowest pollution and environmental hazards, and the strongest health outcomes. Really, when we look for sites to develop housing in, you can't really win the competitions unless you develop them in the high or highest resource areas. And so the state's really gone all in on this in the last 5 years, as they've said, we're going all in. We want we want the lower income families, seniors, to be located within these highest resource areas, and the outcomes are proven to be better.
Yeah, hi, I'm Garrett McSorley. I'm the project architect for the project here in Bayside. My role is to help develop the project from start to finish. So yeah, we envision housing here where people can get up for work in the morning and take their bicycle and ride down the road and enjoy the beauty of the bay and watch the geese flying over. That's really the vision. We have that opportunity here with that kind of living this small town environment, but have enough opportunity for families to have a nice, high quality, new home to live in, that they're proud of living in, that they enjoy the community of their immediate neighbors and the surrounding community. Hopefully kids will be able to walk directly straight across the street to their new school and live in an environment that they can be proud of and that they are part of that community and it's theirs. And they're not just a temporary resident, but it's actually their home, and that's what we can create. We work on a lot of projects of this type, multifamily housing, mostly in the affordable housing, also homeless housing and other transitional housing. It's what we would call kind of the missing middle typology of housing, where we have lots of projects, locally, which are small single-family homes, maybe some duplexes, starting to see more and more ADUs. And then the other end of the spectrum is like high-rise, mid-rise housing projects, like the project Cal Poly Humboldt recently built, the dormitories. And it's kind of that scale cross between single-family homes and large development projects. And what we're looking here in Bayside is that missing middle of projects that are 2, 3, 4 stories in height, and something that's neighborhood oriented, high quality family housing, focusing on daylighting and views and creating a nice neighborhood environment to grow up in. Instead of the approach of one large, tall building, which could be efficient in massing to get the maximum number of units, we've broken it down to 4 much smaller buildings that are spaced across the property in a kind of a long east-west orientation. So the roofs of the buildings are oriented for solar and allowing daylight and direct sunlight to get into the units so the residents themselves can enjoy a daylit home, and to prevent shade and shadow on the neighboring properties. The property is actually ideal from a solar perspective because it's sloping towards the south. It has the topography is running across the site, so we can step up along the property with these buildings that are oriented east-west, so they maximize the amount of solar exposure. And then each building has a low sloped roof. That roof is intentionally designed that way and actually drives the whole form of the buildings themselves, because we want to maximize the amount of solar panels. Because the residents here, almost all of their power is going to be generated by solar on their buildings. So the residents have essentially the lowest utility bill you can get, $5, $12 a month. And that the building design helps enable that by allowing enough room for the solar panels. And so the shape and the stepping of the buildings allows solar to penetrate the entire site and to get into the windows and create daylit living environments inside.
Yeah, so we're also working to build our projects that are energy efficiency in a way that lowers the utility bills for the residents that live there. And the strategies that we have are things like robust building envelopes, which includes insulation. It would include special type of windows that in this area where it's cold, they would bring in, they bring in the heat versus reflect the heat. We also choose our appliances and our water heating and our space heating that are extra efficient versus what you might see in a typical regular home. We go above and beyond the code and provide energy efficient water heating and space heating. All electric. All of our buildings are all electric. We don't use any natural gas or any propane. So that provides us the opportunity to offset those loads, the electrical loads, with photovoltaic panels, solar panels on our roof systems. And so for pretty much for all the projects that Danco's done over the last decade, we've worked to provide our housing at net zero to the tenants. So essentially their bills are just the cost of the meter set from PG&E. So they're typically about $10 a month for all of their energy use that we've been able to produce.
So with all of affordable housing projects, it ends up creating an opportunity for improving the infrastructure of the community around. And in this particular project, one of the infrastructure improvements we've planned is a bus stop where the Humboldt Transit Authority can run a new route that's not currently available and help to reduce congestion on Old Arcata Road. This new bus stop that we're planning is an opportunity to improve the circulation and transportation options for everyone, not just the people who live in this new housing development, but for all of the neighbors around to be able to get to where they need to go without using their car. We've designed the site to allow the greatest amount of native landscaping surrounding all of the buildings and around the property. This includes what we call low impact development to manage stormwater and filter and treat stormwater runoff. And the amount of green space is in balance with the project density. We have 45 units, so across about 1.7 acres. So this project is in that sweet spot of around 26 units per acre. And that still allows open space around the buildings, with useful for the playground area and for landscaping as a buffer. Along the north edge of the property, where there's neighborhood homes surrounding it, we've created a larger buffer, and that would all be native landscaping, no irrigation needed. And then also around the perimeter where there's edges of where people would be walking, we can integrate in edible landscaping. At the stage of design we're at right now, we've already produced a full site lighting design in order to look at the potential for using dark sky lighting, prevent glare and lighting onto the neighboring environments and natural area around. And we study the foot candles and photometrics to ensure that the light levels are appropriate and create a sense of safety and security at the same time as maintaining that dark, semi-rural character of the neighborhood. We're taking an underutilized industrial property and creating vibrant housing with buffers and native landscaping all around that provides habitat and just increase overall natural diversity within the neighborhood.
I'll start by saying that the two most significant environmental concerns that we're aware of at this time on the site are the hazardous soils and the wetland issue. This project does afford the opportunity with regard to the hazardous soils to completely clean the site up. Without the financial motivation of this project, those contaminated soils are going to stay in place and continue to be a problem in our community indefinitely. In terms of our analysis of the environmental impacts, right now the city is proposing to do what's called a focused EIR. A focused EIR concentrates on only the environmental impacts that have come out of the public process to date. And so we'll be doing an initial study, we'll be doing public scoping, we'll be doing agency scoping, and taking all of that information and focusing on what there's substantial evidence in the record to determine that there's an environmental impact that we need to evaluate. The city just got done with a comprehensive update to its general plan. It evaluated several different factors in CEQA across the city and evaluated sites like these for those larger scale environmental impacts, things like noise, traffic, etc. And so those were already adequately addressed in a very recent environmental impact report. And so you can focus in on just the environmental impacts that are unique to this project site once you've done that. That's what we're proposing to do. Currently, we think those are going to be the two that I just discussed, wetlands and hazardous soils. But we're going to go through a public process to identify what those focused topics will be. The environmental impact report is kind of a side process with the project review. Environmental impact report is part of the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, and in meeting our obligations under CEQA, we're required to disclose the environmental impacts and to avoid or mitigate those environmental impacts. So that's what CEQA process is intended to do, and that's what we'll do through this EIR. The EIR has certain timelines and periods for public comment, and we'll be responding to those public comment. That whole process will take us about 9 months on the short side. And through that process, there'll be lots of public involvement, opportunities for public comment. That will run concurrently with our evaluation for the project overall and for the funding associated with the project as well. We can't disentangle the project itself from the funding, from the environmental impact, and so all of those come together and we evaluate them in one package. We just hired Helix Consulting to help us do the environmental impact report, and Danco will be paying for those services as a pass-through. We'll bill them, they'll pay for those services. And those reports should be coming out, in early 2026. We'll be having a notice of prep come out sometime in the next month, which will alert the community to the fact that we're preparing an environmental impact report. And then once that notice of preparation is circulated, we'll then be releasing the draft environmental impact report after having done some scoping with the community. So early 2026, I would say into March, we'll start having public hearings. We'll come back with a final environmental impact report sometime, say, midsummer. And then midsummer to early fall is when I anticipate decisions being made on this project, taking action on that environmental impact report, having hearings at the city council where they'll be able to take final action.
My name is Trent Weiss. I'm a civil engineer in California working for AEI Consultants. We do the environmental consulting for this project as it relates to the environmental concerns, to work with the state agencies to ensure that the environment is protected. AEI is the consultant to DANCO to help with the interaction and to be the expert to support the Water Board's requests for additional information or remedial plans and for the final implementation when we get there. When a developer such as DANCO is looking to buy a property, they'll hire AEI to perform an environmental review that can include a phase 1 environmental assessment and beyond to evaluate the site if there's any current or historical environmental concerns that need to be addressed. And when those environmental concerns are addressed, we look to state and federal standards that are safe for the public as cleanup levels or levels of concern to know what is appropriate to address and what is not. Rogers Garage is a former full-service gas station, service station, and also auto wrecking. And they had former underground storage tanks when they operated as a gas station. Those have since been removed and closed to the state standards. And residual environmental concerns relative to metals associated with auto wrecking are present in the soils. And AEI has been working with DANCO to assess and close those issues out to the satisfaction of the state. I mean, the longer that contamination remains at a property, the longer that there is a risk. So cleaning it up is the best way to protect the human health and the environment. For soils contaminated with metals, we'd be looking at just the removal of the soil itself. So that'll be an excavation down to 1.5 feet as it's currently planned. The excavated soils will be placed into dump trucks or roll-off bins for appropriate off-site disposal and handling. AEI will perform as a third party to observe the excavation activities of the remedial contractor, to document that the dust control is appropriate, to collect the dust samplers, and also to document any loads of soil leaving the site, and that the remediation has been successful. The main concern during construction for metals in soil is dust generation, and that can be managed through wetting of the soils so that dust is not generated. AEI will be in constant communication with the water board so that they know the schedule of activities, they have the opportunity to observe the work, and will document all the work in a final report for the water board's approval. Once the work is completed, AEI will collect soil samples to ensure that all the impacted materials has been removed. With that data, we'll submit that to the water board for their approval that they've signed off that the cleanup has been successful. Because this is a residential development, the cleanup standards applied will be the most stringent for residential development to ensure that the public and the users of the property, which will be the future residents, are protected. There's more risk in leaving the contamination in place than addressing it now in a safe manner.
You know, just in planning in general, you work to keep all of development, in close proximity to amenities, to services, so to prevent urban sprawl. So to convert a brownfield, this would be considered a brownfield, which is a previously used site, previous use, which has contamination, is really the best kind of development you can do. Instead of taking a new site that's maybe on the outskirts of town and converting it to housing, you're reusing an existing site and cleaning up the current environmental concerns and making it ready for new construction.
The Regional Water Quality Control Board has informed us that they are going to take jurisdiction over this wetland. And so it's, according to the state, a wetland, and we're treating it as such. From what I've gathered from talking with people in the community, it's basically a ditch that conveys spring water that's drawn from neighboring properties. That the previous owner, agreed that he would convey that water out to drainage inlets on the street through this ditch. And over time, the ditch deteriorated, it wasn't maintained, and so now it's just kind of sheet flowing across the property. So we're working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board to determine, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, to determine, what's the appropriate mitigation for the site. There's basically three options. One would be to mitigate on site to, all of the soil has to be removed anyway because it's contaminated, so soil will be removed. And then when the soil is replaced, to replace it in roughly the same area, maybe different dimensions, and provide new alignment for a ditch or, bioswale to convey that water. So we can mitigate it on site, or you could mitigate it off site, remove the soil, replace some kind of conveyance, but not try and replicate the wetland conditions on site for that water so that it continues to drain off site. Develop the site with parking as it's currently proposed where the wetland is, and then create a wetland somewhere off site. And then the third alternative, which we'll evaluate in our environmental impact report, but I don't think is desirable, would be to essentially leave the wetland in place where it's at, and then set back from that, and to achieve the density go up instead of having the 3-story buildings as proposed now. The city of Arcata has been really proactive in providing affordable housing. We've worked with many different affordable housing developers over the years and have produced hundreds of units of affordable housing. Typically, they're 80% area median income or less. This particular project would produce about 45 units of housing that would be affordable to folks earning less than 50% median income. Just to give you a sense, for a family of 3, let's say, 50% area median income right now is about $42,000 a year, or just over $20 an hour if you're working full-time. These are the, working poor families that, need safe, affordable, reliable housing to really stabilize, their housing needs and provide them the platform to, produce in the community and to continue to grow and prosper. And so, within a year of this project, you would see basically 45 new families moving into the Bayside area. On the positive side, you'd see some folks that, may not be able to afford to live in the Bayside and partake of, the benefits of that area in general, which again, anecdotally is one of the key drivers in the regional housing needs allocation process, is to ensure that low-income housing isn't like cordoned off in one neighborhood and all the higher income housing is in another. Yeah, there's kind of two ways of thinking about what the housing need is for the city of Arcata. On the one hand, we have sort of state mandated, what they call regional housing needs allocation. These regional housing needs allocations are calculated at the state level based on statewide policy and then handed down to the counties. The counties then distribute those throughout the jurisdictions. And that's a public process that happens leading up to the housing element process. And housing element process is where the cities take that number that they were given by the state and they incorporate the policy and programs that will lead to the production of that housing. The city of Arcata is currently in the 6th housing element cycle, and we have about 610 units that were part of our regional housing needs allocation process. In the upcoming 7th cycle, which begins in 2027-28 and runs through 2035, we have about 1,000 units, so there's a huge uptick in the number of units we're required to produce. So that's one way of talking about the housing needs, and it's nice because it gives you a very concrete number. We can all look at it and say that's the number that we're looking at. But sometimes that state level policy is really divorced from what's going on the ground, and so what's happening in the communities and what the actual housing need is. We mentioned the requirements for the state. Of the approximately 1,000 units that the city is going to be responsible for in this next housing element cycle, about a third of those are for folks earning 50% area median income or less. And so about 328 units or so are going to need to be built in Arcata that serve folks earning less than 50% area median income. So this project would really give us a jump start on meeting that RHNA goal.
Currently, the zoning allows for multifamily use and or commercial uses. And it's zoned and general planned for up to 3 stories with as many units as you can do, no parking required. But as a 100% affordable housing project, it qualifies for a density bonus that allows it to go up to 6 stories.
the underlying policy, the politics of how we're providing for housing in our communities, and this site, whether it's suitable for that. And again, I would just point back to the fact that it's been zoned for this purpose since the early 2000s, and as an aside, the state actually has legislation now that prevents the city from downzoning a property. So even if the community said, hey, we don't think this is the appropriate site, even though it's been zoned this way for the past 25 years, we think you should downzone it so that this project isn't allowable here, and then we can find a new site for this project. The state wouldn't allow us to downzone this project site. What we're experiencing right now with the state of housing law in the state is the whiplash that we're experiencing from having made bad policy changes based on good intentions. Our intentions were to, maintain our neighborhoods, to, maintain housing prices, to, keep the character of the neighborhoods the same. And so as a result of that, we've way underbuilt for what the state needs. By some estimates, we're 1.5 million units behind production in what our housing need is. So I firmly believe that we need to be, aware of the situation that we're living in, aware of the policies, the broader policies, and take proactive roles to plan for what's right for our community. If we don't do that, then the state law actually gives the authority to make those decisions to the developers. So going back to the regional housing needs allocation process that we talked about earlier, and the 300 or so units of area units reserved for 50% or less area median income folks, if we don't develop that, if we don't meet those targets, the state law actually says any developer can come in and develop it just about anywhere. And so by proactively planning for where we want to meet this need and then working together with an affordable housing developer to actually produce that housing, we're preventing the unintended consequences of having housing built wherever, avoiding the unintended consequences of not having any role, any decision-making, any input into what the project would look like. And so, that's been really the, the basis of our planning over the last, 10 years really, is to try and get ahead of where the state is and recognize, our role and responsibility and what the state is mandating that we, accomplish. And then working together with our community to address that need in ways that still feel like Arcata, that still feel like, we had a role in it, that we had active participation. Because there are developers out there who are just looking for communities who aren't meeting their housing goals so that they can come in and build by right without any kind of, regulations surrounding the projects that they're developing.
The site is within the City of Arcata's jurisdiction. It's privately owned, but it lands within the City of Arcata's boundaries. And so the City of Arcata has oversight as the lead agency through the environmental review process, through CEQA, also known as CEQA. And then the City of Arcata also is participating as a financial lending institution. So they're getting granted funds through the state, and then they're loaning those funds to the development, which is a pretty typical model of how affordable housing is financed throughout the state and throughout the country, frankly. So the state agencies grant the money to the localities, which in this case, the locality is City of Arcata, and they act as a conduit, and then they loan those funds to the project. And what that does is it creates local accountability. Though the City of Arcata receives the grant funds, they loan it. City of Arcata is accountable to the state for those funds, and then the development is accountable to the City of Arcata, so that they act as an oversight agency on the financing that comes from the state, and also through environmental review and land use rules. So the project's made up of multiple funding sources. Some of those funds are coming from the state agency, from HCD, Housing and Community Development, to the City of Arcata, which then loans those to the projects. Another portion of those funds are low-income housing tax credits, which the development would apply directly for those and then be accountable directly to the state for those funds.
A lot of the financing and funding constraints really push these projects beyond what you would have in a normal project, in a market rate environment where you're just building to minimum code standards. Because there's so many different partners involved in this project, from the city, the tax credit financiers, they're all looking for a really high quality product.
On this particular project, we're also helping to finance the project. We've been involved in applying for a competitive permanent local housing allocation grant of $5 million for the project. We've awarded about $180,000 of pre-development funding for the project through permanent local housing allocation funds that the city has locally. We're looking at applying for a couple of other grants with the developer to ensure that the overall conditions that we're hoping for in terms of, for instance, the bus pass program, the long-term affordability covenants, the objectives that the city has for its affordable housing portfolio, that all of those are met. So we're not only working with conditions of approval that give us the regulatory authority to say it has to be designed this way, but we're also working with them to create long-term regulatory agreements that ensure that the project has continued to operate in the way that we think it's going to be operating when we make these approvals initially. That gives us long-term authority to do inspections of the site, to ensure that they're complying with their affordability covenants, to make sure that the project, that even sometimes if there's like an impact on the neighborhood that was unanticipated, it gives us an end to be able to start having that conversation with the developer. Hey, can we modify the way that the project's being managed to ensure that we address this community concern? So those are the primary ways that we're working to address long-term commitments to the community based on what we're saying now that the project is going to deliver. The investors in the project only get a benefit if the project remains affordable. And so they ensure, the outside investors ensure that the project remains affordable for that period of time, that 55-year term. The city is also involved in financing and has same requirements that for 55 years it remain affordable. And so we do annual monitorings to ensure that they're meeting those objectives. The investors are doing annual monitorings to make sure that they meet those objectives. And the nice thing about having the city involved is that then there's local representation. When someone's not satisfied with what's going on in the project, whether it's a resident who's living there that feels like they're aggrieved, or a neighbor who feels like the project isn't working the way that they had anticipated, the city can use its regulatory agreement authority to get in there and help to ensure that it's meeting its objectives to the community as well as to the residents that are maintaining affordability. There's a near-term benefit from the folks working on the project. People work for a living, they get paid for the work that they do. Those funds are coming from the funding sources that are used to create the project. And so they're the first people who have a financial impact. But really it's the families that will live in these units for the next 50, 60, 70 years, maybe longer, that have a financial impact of being able to have safe, affordable housing to them, based on these 50% area median income thresholds. And so it's an economic driver for those families. Our hope for the timeline is that after this video is produced, the community will have a couple of weeks to, watch the video, learn, what's being said about the project, and develop questions that they have from this information. We'll then have a scoping meeting and a public meeting that folks can come to and ask their questions, raise their concerns. We'll also take their environmental concerns at that time and try and address any concerns or questions that came up from this. Moving forward from that, it's probably going to be about a 2-month timeline to get the draft EIR out and have it completely circulated. So somewhere between, say, 60 to 90 days from the time we have our scoping meeting, public scoping meeting. After that, the public will have an opportunity to provide comments on that draft EIR. The city will then take in all of those comments and review them and prepare responses to them and produce what's called a final EIR. That final EIR doesn't have a circulation period per se, but once we get that final EIR out there, we'll start having public hearings on the project. And so, all of that between producing the drafts and holding the hearings, people should expect that they'll see opportunities for public input in January 2026, sometime around April of 2026 will be the midpoint hearings. And then, late summer is what I would anticipate is when we'll start holding those final hearings on the project, on the CEQA document, and on the financing for the project.
The whole planning and design process is fluid. There's no really start and stop. Until it's built, everything is on the table and we can continue to refine and improve the project throughout the process. And when we get community feedback that's specific, we really will think about that and bring it into our design and in many cases incorporate those elements or something similar to that, those ideas. This whole process we're going through here is a public engagement process, and that's the point of the public process, is to gain community feedback, and that sort of specific feedback when people have ideas about the design or use of materials, or they really want to see natural wood or high quality lighting. Those are things that we directly take into account, and we can go back and study and see how we can bring that to life within this project to be something that the community around can be proud of, that they're not just forced, this isn't just forced upon them, but they are actually part of this, and this is their project to help bring wonderful people to their community and be able to live as a community.
Best case scenario, we work together as a community to describe a project for this site that maybe not everyone loves, but can live with, and that would happen over the course of the next 9 months. This project is really contingent in its current form on the city being willing to help finance it, and so that's a critical component to the way that it's currently formed. If Danco were to say, "Hey, look, we don't need city money. We're going to find a way to finance this ourselves," then we would be going through this process with, I would say, a lot fewer options for being able to change the project, to affect the project. We would still be doing the environmental analysis. We'd be looking at the contamination and the wetlands. At the end of the day, those two environmental concerns can be mitigated, fully mitigated on this site. And so Danco could, at some point in the future, say, without city involvement, without the council's pressure to frame and craft how this project is going to look and feel, they would be able to come in and do this project. Even in our jurisdiction, the fastest growing demographic for first-time homelessness is people over 60. So senior citizens who've had homes their entire lives, have been productive members of society, are living on a fixed income. Their rent rates are outpacing their ability to pay for that housing, and so that's a travesty. Those are the types of stories. That's the narrative, and that's the impact that I think we need to avoid by making sure that we're producing adequate housing for the community.